If you're interested in the best psychology book of 2025, check out Psych with Mike and Brett, A User's Guide to Being Human. Links are in the description below. Today, we're going to revisit an episode that Brett and I did on the existential psychologist Rollo May. Hope you enjoy it. Have a great Friday. And here's Psych with Mike and Brett. Welcome into Psych with Mike Library. This is Dr. Michael Mahan.
And I'm Brett Newcomb.
How are you today?
Doing well.
Yeah.
What are we talking about today?
We are going to talk about, you introduced us in grad school to Irving Yalom early in, right?
Yes,
Because
absolutely.
Now, I don't know if you're a fanboy.
Oh, I am.
And so you introduced us to Irving Yalom, and one of the things that I was enamored with of him, he's a psychiatrist, so he is a medical doctor.
But he does therapy.
But he does therapy, and has been a huge proponent. He is one of the most staunch proponents of the profession of professional counseling of anyone in this country.
Yeah.
But he is an existential psychologist or an existential practitioner.
All right.
Right?
So say what you mean by that.
So existentialism is the idea that the meaning of life is what is important to us, and that we are in search of meaning.
So we're drawn to the light,
Yeah.
whatever the light is.
Yes. So Viktor Frankl was an existential psychologist. Irving Yalom is an existential psychologist. And the guy we're going to talk about today, Rollo May, was an existential psychologist.
Yeah.
And I've known about Rollo May for my entire professional career, right? I mean, he is one of the big names in psychology.
Well, in the 60s and 70s especially.
But I had never, for full disclosure, the only book, was a prolific writer.
Yeah.
The only book of his that I've ever read was Love and Will. And I've always told people what is amazing to me about that book is that you can read that book today in 2024, and he wrote it in 68 or something like that.
Mid-60s.
Yeah. And it feels like he was writing it yesterday. I mean, all of the things that, and obviously there are some contextual clues that don't match up, but when he talks about, the pornography and people's drives and things like that, it could be just as relevant today as it was back then. So I was amazed by that, but I didn't know a lot about him. And then somebody asked us on the interwebs to what our opinion of Rollo May was. Could we talk about that? And so I put that on the agenda.
Yeah.
And we did a little bit of research, and I'm now fascinated. I'm like a Rollo May fanboy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So go ahead.
So that happens in this field.
Yeah.
There are voices that speak more loudly and become a center of attention. Then over time, our attention moves to other voices. Mm-hmm. And there was a period where he was one of the central voices that you had to know about to be considered educated,
Right.
Knowledgeable. And the value of his contributions still remains, but they're not the focus of attention the way that they were.
And the ubiquity of his presence.
Yeah.
He worked, so the reason I started talking about Irving Yalom is because he worked with Irving Yalom, and Rollo May was a proponent of counseling. But he also worked with Maslow and with Carl Rogers on the development of humanistic psychology.
Well, he was in that zone, in that field, because he had been a high school teacher, he'd been a minister, and he became a psychiatrist. Mm-hmm. So, and in private practice and taught at universities. So, I mean, he much like what you've done, much like what I did.
Right.
But we aren't seminal voices.
But he had his hand in so many things.
Right time and right place.
Yeah, and I don't think that any of us really attribute his name to any specific theory or whatever. But then when you do the research and you find out everything that he was into, it's like this guy, I think that if there is a name for me at this point now, after we've started to look into it, that represents the evolution of our profession, specifically counseling, over the last 50 years, it would be either Irving Yalom or Rollo May.
I probably would agree with you, but what I want to say about that is there are fads and trends in our business, just like there are in every other business, and people get absorbed into a trend, and then I think they get bored. They get easily distracted, and they say, "Well, there has to be more. There has to be something else. I wonder what this is like." And so they start reading and listening to other voices or trying out strategies. And there's a real push within the system to institutionalize treatment strategies.
Right.
And so the idea of being, for the sake of economics, insurance companies drive it. And they say, we will give you 6 sessions to resolve a diagnosis of anxiety. And we want you to use these specific treatment strategies because these are the ones that research says work the best and the best odds. So this is what we want you to do. So then everybody that's treating an anxiety disorder is starting to say, well, okay, need to teach you about meditation. I need to teach you about thought stopping. I need to teach you about deep breathing because those things will make your anxieties go away. And nobody's looking to say, well, where did that come from? How come you're anxious in the first place? What's driving this bus? And if we get a handle on this particular manifestation, this symptomology that you're showing, you're having heartbeat race and break out in a sweat, and nothing's going on, but it's happening. What's causing you to have a panic attack? Let's just put a limit on your ability to have a panic attack, and then that won't solve the problem. And we can do that for $4,000. Otherwise, we're just endlessly taking money from you, and you're chatting with us about who knows what, and is that really helpful? And insurance companies will say, no, we have to have a measurable, defined quantity with a statistical chance of success.
That has to be documentable.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that within the industry, so diagnostic focal points become fads. So for a while, it's eating disorders. For right now, one of the fad concerns is suicide among teenagers, especially boys. Suicide among elderly men, single old men. Those rates are skyrocketing. Why? So the insurance companies are saying, okay, if you have a specialized training, if you have a credential in the management of suicide, we will give you 12 visits and pay this much. If your client is in our insurance pool, we'll do that. And then these are the strategies that you can use without having to justify.
Right.
And if you're going to use some other kind of strategy, then you're going to have to write a treatment plan and send it in for our panel to consider, and they'll come back to you and say, no, you can't do that. Or, yeah, you can do that, but we want this level of involvement.
Right.
So one question we are all trained as clinicians to ask, who's the client?
Yeah.
Who do you work for? Do you work for the person sitting in the chair across from you, or do you work for the insurance company that's writing the check? And that's why in our industry right now, I don't know anyone that accepts insurance payments firsthand. They all take the money from the client and give the paperwork the client needs to negotiate with the insurance company. But the client has to jump through the insurance company hoops because the clinicians aren't doing it anymore. And right now they don't have to because the demand for treatment, for availability, is so high.
Post-pandemic,
but the clinician can say, no, I don't work for the insurance companies. But when we first started, we were desperate to get on an insurance panel. And they had all kinds of controls that they tried to assert to control what we could do.
Right. And I will say that I feel so lucky and so blessed that I came into this profession in a group of people that taught me how to survive without accepting insurance. And we were so far ahead of the game back then that now, we don't do that, and we've never done that. I've never done that. And now more and more of our compatriots are saying, oh, well, I don't have to accept insurance. And even doctors, even some medical doctors are saying, I don't accept insurance. And that's great. But what, amazed me, or what fascinated me by our research into Rollo is that he saw this idea of fads and he spoke to it, even though he was a part of the development of humanistic psychology, even though he would call himself and was known as an existential psychologist. He was very devoutly committed to the ideas of Freud, Jung, and Adler, because he worked with Adler. He followed Adler for a long time. And I don't know if Adler was a mentor, but certainly Tilk was a mentor of his, Paul Tilk, who was another guy who is well known in psychodynamic circles. And even though he talked about this existential psychology, he was very devoted to the fathers, the masters of psychology. And he thought that the manifestation of these different fads were because people got bored. People got bored doing things a certain way. And so the natural tendency, even for professionals, is to want to reach out and find something new. And so people get on board with these fads and they ride that wave for a while. But eventually what I think that Adler, or that May was a proponent of, is that everything comes back to the drive theories of the masters. That's really where the seat of psychology is, and where the real interventions that matter take place. You agree or disagree?
I don't know. I was just thinking about that. To me, that's the 10,000-foot view. And I don't know that I can hold that when I have a new client come in the room and sit down.
And say, this is what's happening to me today in my life.
Right, because I want to get focused on what they're presenting. But I think conceptually you have to have a basket that you put things into. And maybe periodically you change baskets. I don't know if you change baskets or the baskets get changed.
Yeah, right.
Because I know that there was a time in my experience when 90% of my client were adolescents, adolescent males for the most part, because I had taught high school, and because many clinicians don't want to work with adolescents because they're not perceived to have the power in the system.
We both got put into that niche at different points in our career.
But one day I looked at my appointment calendar, and it was mostly women who were in their 35 to 50 age range with the life challenges of that age bracket. Then one day I looked, and it was mostly men who were 40 to 60. And so I didn't consciously
You didn't change that you were aware of.
Right.
But the people who were coming to see you had
the referral
changed.
base changed it for me. Oh, you need to see this guy. He knows what he's doing. So you just ride the wave. But I think that what we're talking about is the theoretical orientation does matter in the understanding. So when we talk about Rollo May, I think one specific thing that pops for me right now, because one of the fad issues and diagnostic categories is anxiety. So many people are suffering anxiety because
I'm glad you brought it around to that, because that's
anomaly in the culture. Isolation, loneliness, technological addictions, whatever. People are having all kinds of anxiety attacks and panic attacks and worries and physiological issues, and that's more your area than mine, so you can speak to that in a minute. But when you go back and look at Rollo May said he thought anxiety was an issue that needed to be treated, but he had 3 thoughts about where it was coming from. And he agreed with Erwin Yalom in the first one. He said it's the recognition of your own death, your own impending death, no matter what age you are. We all know eventually we're going to die.
And so that's a very existential idea.
Yes. And we know that. And we're the only animal that does know we're going to die. But we don't think it's ever going to happen. It's going to be down the road. And it doesn't start to become real until people in our age cohort start to die. And it's like, wait a minute, 5 of my high school mates just died? So what does that say for me? And then the older you get, you start looking at the life expectancy trajectory, and you start getting symptoms of physical disabilities and so on, and you start to have anxiety. Is this it? Is this the beginning of the end? Am I going to that 5-year life review that comes before the end of the death? So death and the fear of death causes us anxiety, because then we have existential questions. What did my life mean? Did I touch anyone? Did I make a difference? Was I a good person? Am I seen as having been worthwhile? All those questions in the back of your mind, even while you're working as an auto mechanic or taking your wife to church, it's there. And so that's a source for anxiety that he thinks helps the clinician understand and define what's going on, how do you make sense out of it. Second thing he says is it's a drive for creativity.
Right.
So many of us feel locked into the path that we are on. We feel like we didn't choose it. It was an accident. It was planned for us by our families or our life circumstances. That you were expected to go to college. You were expected to become a lawyer. So you did. You never really looked at the world and said, I want to be a lawyer. You just did it. And now you are one.
Yeah. Can I jump in real
Yeah.
quick? Okay, and so you write down your third point so you don't
I have
forget
it,
it. Okay,
yeah.
but that was the piece for me that was so elucidating, was his perspective on how anxiety was either a creator of or a manifestator of creativity. Because my perception of anxiety, my clinical conceptualization of anxiety has always been that it is a negative that is caused usually through rumination and cognitive dissonance. So cognitive dissonance is the inability for the human mind to comfortably hold two conflicting thoughts simultaneously.
Yeah.
So I want to ask a girl out, but I'm afraid of rejection.
Right.
Those two conflicting thoughts rubbing up against each other causes anxiety that we experience as uncomfortable. But May believed that that anxiety was what drove us to creativity, which is a different way of viewing it, but says that then anxiety itself is not a negative.
Right.
Yeah,
It's a motivator.
right. And so
and
what
it's-
you do with it
it's a
is,
signal.
yeah.
So if we can persuade the client that it's a signal, we can start to ask them, what's it a signal for? Mm-hmm. And so creativity is the second one. And the third one is freedom.
Right.
We feel
Yeah,
trapped.
I wrote that down too. Mhm.
And so if we are entrapped, then we just have to hang our head and let this thing run its course and life ends and oh well. Or is there something that we can do? So if I'm stuck in a job or a career, if I'm stuck in a marriage or a relationship, do I have to stay stuck? I have kids and grandkids. What am I going to say to them? Where did Grandpa go? Oh, he got a divorce. Well, why? Well, because he's a jerk. Okay. And so we can't do that.
Right.
Or because we've given a commitment, and once we've given our word, we can't change our word, even though life changed. There are all kinds of
So on
complications.
this issue of freedom, let me ask you a
Yeah.
question. Okay, so what I got out of our research was that May believed that freedom was required for anxiety, that where there is no freedom, there is no anxiety. Do you feel that was the impression that I got?
That's not the way I heard
Okay,
it.
okay.
I'm fine with that, and I mean, it makes sense. I just hadn't thought of it that way. What I heard was it's a desire to break the bonds of entrapment and be free to choose your own path.
Okay, so what you heard was that if you have less freedom, you're going to experience anxiety that's going to drive you towards more freedom.
Right.
You can either take that path or not. Okay.
That's the way I heard it.
No, and that makes a lot of sense to me as well. But regardless of which of those two views, and maybe he didn't even have either one of those views, but regardless of which of those things is what May believed, the truth is that he saw that freedom was an inexorable component of anxiety.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So May and Yalom, I want to pull this back to the connector for the two of them because I think it really matters. Stress to us Yalom wrote a book called Love's Executioner, which was a phenomenal book.
If you are a therapist and you have not read Love's Executioner, it is important for you to get that book
It
and
is.
read it. Yes.
Yalom takes 10 clients that he's worked with, each of whom has a different issue. And he writes this book in terms of the client said this, then I said that. The client said this, then I said that. I learned this, the client learned that. He walks it through as if you're in the room with them, which for training purposes is excellent. But he had a client that was having a sexual addiction. He was having affairs with as many women as he could find. And when they got to the bottom of why is this happening, what's going on here, he was afraid of dying. And he was trying to leave pieces of himself everywhere that he could. So he was trying to impregnate all these women to give him some kind of life beyond death. And
A legacy.
yeah. So I think fear of dying is a real serious conversation that clinicians need to have with their clients. Open it up and invite it. A lot of times you just have to invite it, and then the client is given permission to say, oh, we can. Same thing with suicide. When they talk about suicide, don't shut down. Don't get afraid. You cannot be afraid. You have to talk about it. And you have to say, why now?
Right.
What happened this week? Because your life hasn't changed dramatically. So something right now is triggering it. What was it?
Right.
I don't know. Well, if you act on this, who's going to feed your dog? What do you mean? I said, well, your dog's expecting you to come home today. And he's not going to have dinner. And what do you want done with your dog? Well, I haven't thought about that. Well, then maybe you should wait another day or two. You don't have to do this today. And do you have a plan? How specific is your plan? And if the plan is really, really specific, then as a clinician, you may have ethical responsibilities to have them hospitalized or call the police and have interventions made. But if the plan is non-specific, I don't know, I just know that that's the right path. Well, then they're not in an urgent, immediate situation.
Right.
So you have to know those things so that you don't panic and misreact.
And let me just say as a disclaimer, whether you are a therapist or you are just a person who has ever thought
Don't
about
be
suicide,
afraid to talk about it.
you cannot be afraid.
Yeah.
There is no clinical evidence that supports the idea that talking about suicide has ever caused anyone to act on suicidal ideation. As a matter of fact, it is exactly the opposite. The more you talk about it, the less likely they are to act.
Takes away the immediacy, makes it more real. Anyway, Rollo May, Erwin Yalom.
Yeah.
Who's the third one that you mentioned? I'm blanking now. I wanted to say something about him too, but it's gone. Maybe it'll come back.
Oh, Viktor Frankl.
Oh, Viktor Frankl. Yeah. Viktor Frankl wrote a book after he was a concentration camp victim in World War II.
An amazing story.
And he wrote, if you can't change your reality, you have to change the way you perceive reality. And so that's a whole nother minefield for discussion about doing therapy.
We should talk about Viktor Frankl someday.
Yeah, we should.
The music that appears in Psych with Mike is written and performed by Mr. Benjamin DeClue. And as always, if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike and Brett. Wow, that was super therapeutic.
Well, one hopes.
It didn't feel like it, but...
So what are we doing this time?
Rollo.
All right.